These arguments for the existence of God focus on our ability to use our minds. However, there seems to be a distinction between the mind and the brain. Are we dealing with something that is just physical, or are we dealing with something that is both physical and spiritual? To help us understand this distinction, let us view three ways to argue for the existence of God. Existential, direct experience of God by way of personal revelation. Not really an argument, because one does not usually argue for something that can be directly experienced. However, it becomes an argument when trying to convince people who have not experienced the same or similar revelation. A posteriori, evidence from the world, from the observable empirical universe, insisting that God is necessary to explain certain features of the cosmos. A priori, the conception that God as a being is so perfect that his non-existence is inconceivable. It begins with the ideal of God, who is defined as being greater than which nothing can be imagined. It then argues that the characteristic of existence must belong to such a being, since it is greater to exist than not to exist. In order to find a beginning for the exploration of God, René Descartes started with the mind. He knew that he existed because he could think. His famous saying is, "I think, therefore I am." With that as a beginning point, the thinking of the day continued outward towards the concept of God, at which point Anselm put forth the proposition that God is the greatest of all conceivable beings. A being that does not exist cannot be the greatest of all conceivable beings. Therefore, by definition, God must exist. The idea of God leads to the understanding of the most perfect being. The most perfect being is greater than which nothing can be imagined. To elaborate, which is greater, 1 or 0? 1 is greater than 0. Then it would reason that something is greater than nothing. Therefore, in order to be the most perfect being, one would have to exist than not to exist. No one who understands what God is can conceive that God does not exist. It was stated in another way, and the person that really had the beginning of this thought was Aristotle, one of my heroes, and it's called the law of non-contradiction. It is impossible for the same thing to belong and not to belong at the same time to the same thing and in the same respect. Therefore, in order to be the most perfect being, the most unconceivable being, is that God must exist than not to exist. He can't be both at the same time, and it's greater to exist. Now, the first person I actually heard this concept of the law of non-contradiction was from a man by the name of Professor Ron Nash. I have his book, Faith and Reason. It's a good book in my library. If you'd like to have a good read that one. But he was kind of a funny guy, and this is one of the cartoons that I took off of one of his presentations on the law of non-contradiction. Although these arguments seem logical, Kant stated that perfection is not a true predicate, and thus a proposition can be logically necessary without being true in fact. In other words, just because something is logically sound does not make it true fact. This can be said with each of these arguments. However, I believe that collectively there is enough evidence to create doubt in the non-believer and also to present substance for the believer to know that their way of thinking is viable. Now to continue the understanding of the difference between the spiritual mind and the physical brain. On one hand, we have Melvin Minsky of MIT, who stated that the brain is a computer made of meat. However, Alan Sandage posed the question, how is it that an inanimate matter can organize itself to contemplate itself? This stresses the difference between spirit-body dichotomy. Based on John 1 4 through 5, John Calvin stated that this scripture shows that man's soul is so illuminated by the brightness of God's light as never to be without some slight flame, or at least a spark of it. He also said, still, we see in this diversity some remaining traces of the image of God, which distinguish the entire human race from the other creatures. God created man. God breathed life into man. In the image of God, God created man to love him. Can man create a machine to love him? Is this thinking due to a computer made of meat? Or did a creator specially form us with the ability to reason with a spiritual aspect? Mind, spiritual, mental, relational, physical. We are the image bearer of God's image. If this is true, then we need to take this life and use it to God's glory. I know that I exist because I can think and reason. That is something that separates me from the other creatures. Is this ability to reason able to be proven by evolution? Where's the evidence? It seems that intelligence can only come from intelligence. Therefore, intelligence must come from an intelligent being. An intelligent being must have always existed because nothing could have created that being. An intelligent being that has the ability to create intelligent reasoning beings must be greater than which nothing can be imagined. Although there seems to be a missing link in evolution between the biology of humans and other creatures, to me the biggest missing link is more in the area of the ability to reason and the spiritual aspect than the biological. I refer back to Rene Descartes, who believed that God created humans with innate ideas. These innate ideas include such things as math and science. For example, 2 plus 2 equals 4, and the idea of the perfect triangle. Look up innate ideas for further study. I believe that innate ideas are encoded into our DNA and give us the ability to connect with our spirit and to contemplate God. Although there seems to be a missing link in evolution between the biology of humans and the other creatures, to me the biggest missing link is more in the area of the ability to reason and the spiritual aspect than the biological. In the Confessions, we find that God is a spirit, infinite, eternal, and invisible. So how do I define the ontological argument that is somewhat different than what others have stated? In my opinion, the ontological argument. God is the greatest conceivable being because God is a spirit, infinite, eternal, and invisible, with the ability to create the physical universe that includes intelligent biological beings that are self-aware, with innate ideas, and have a spirit because they were created in the image of God, who is a spirit. And now you know more of the story. Stay tuned. This is John McCamick with Truth University. Good day.